Good morning. This is Elsie Kearns, and today I have the privilege of interviewing Richard Bell, who is a photojournalist and the author of the new book, The Last Veterans of World War II. And he's done a fabulous photo edition of this. Richard was at the Philadelphia Inquirer at one point, was photo editor, and he also won an award as a photo editor of the year. And right now, most of his work is in commercial photography and writing. So Richard, welcome to the BeLive program. And the first thing that I want to ask you and talk about is the fact that there was a very traumatic event in your college years that actually led you to change your major from biology to journalism. So can you start out by telling us that and how it led into the story?
Sure. And thanks for having me here today, Elsie.
You're welcome.
I went to Kent State University, and I was 20 years old in 1970, the year of the Kent State shootings. Being 20 years old and being a sophomore in college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I was in a pre-med course, something I wasn't really interested in. Well, pretty much everybody knows about the Kent State shootings, and I participant, I don't know if that's the right word, but it was a 4-day event. We had the guard on our campus for 3 days. There was rioting. There was some burning down of buildings. It was a turbulent time. The country was divided, similar to today. And we all know what happened. The guard fired into an unarmed mob of students. And I was there. The U.S. Army shot at me. I ran. I'm here. But it was traumatic, and I've thought about it my whole life. But at that time, what it made me do was I'd wanted to be a photographer, and I found out my college had that as a major, a photojournalistic degree. And it was like, hey, going through what just happened, I know I want to do this. I'm going to do it whether it works or not. So it was a catalyst for a lot of things. I mean, I could talk about Kent State for this whole 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But going back from that and this book and getting the idea for this book, it actually comes from a childhood memory. As a kid growing up in the 1950s, I did enjoy reading the newspaper. I did enjoy looking at Life and Look and the Saturday Evening Post. And I distinctly remember getting, I don't know which one of the magazines it was, and looking through it and stopping and freezing at a picture of a bunch of old guys with big long beards carrying flags in a parade. And I read the caption, and it said, "The Last Civil War Veterans."
Oh, wow.
And that made this 6-year-old kid go, no way.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was 1,000 years ago.
Right.
And here they are. They're still alive. And that made an imprint. And when the 1990s rolled around and the World War I veterans were at the end, I started this project actually as a World War I. But I started too late. And I decided I'm not going to let it happen again. And when World War II comes around and the last guys are around, I'm going to do the book. And that's how I kicked this off, with that thought from my childhood.
Well, Richard, you interviewed for this book everyone from a Supreme Court justice, judge, to, I'm checking here, to a Navajo code talker, Japanese American Medal of Honor recipient, and actually an Army nurse that was in the MASH unit. So how did you find all the people that are in this book?
Yeah, finding them was a real trick.
Yeah.
But I focused in on what I wanted the book to be first, which was a testament to the diversity of the war effort. Because I knew about all these things. I knew all these people in every walk of life and every ethnic group. Everybody was involved. It was a concerted, collective effort in the war years. And I wanted to depict that. So I made a list of people I wanted. You know, I wanted the local guy. I wanted the Supreme Court justice. I wanted the senator. I wanted the president. You know, I wanted the nurses, the women who served. Only nurses went overseas. There were something like 35,000 women serving in the military, but only nurses could go overseas. So I have two Army nurses in the book, but I also have a woman Coast Guard person who served in Charleston, South Carolina, and I have a woman who she was a major, and she served in the secret code breaking in the Pentagon in the book. So I wanted to cover all the bases. How did I find them? Well, nobody keeps track of these people. No government agency or anything like that. So I first did the easy stuff. I looked them up in the phone book. I knew their names because you can search online who are the last politicians who were World War II veterans. So you get a short list. How many code talkers are left? You get a little list. Then I start looking them up in the white pages. That got me quite a few people who I just called them up, you know. The second way to find them was to go again to the internet and Google search other publications that had done stories about the categories I was looking for, like a Navajo code talker.
Yeah.
I knew his name. I couldn't get through to him, but I found a story by a journalist out in Arizona who had gotten to him and who had done a nice story. I contacted that reporter and I said, hey, I'm a fellow journalist. Can you put me in touch with Roy Hawthorne? He goes, absolutely. Roy is a great man. He'll talk to you. So that reporter sent me his phone number and I called Roy. And I said, Roy, this is what I'm doing. Is it okay if I come out to Arizona and visit with you? And he said, sure. So I went to Arizona. And in this case, this was, I thought I was only going out there for Roy. So Roy and I spent a day together and, you know, we're having lunch and we're just, you know, jabbering after doing the book stuff. And I go, Roy, you know anybody else who I should have in the book? You know, like any of your friends around here? And he goes, yeah, I do. I said, who's that? And Roy goes, Hiroshi Miyamura. And I go, what? He goes, oh, sure. He was in the war and he won the Medal of Honor. I said, Roy, how do I talk to, where is he? Roy goes, hold on. And he pulls his phone out of his pocket. This is a 93-year-old Navajo guy. Pulls his phone out of his pocket and goes, I'll call him. Click, click, click. Hey, Hershey. That's his nickname. Hey, Hershey, I got a reporter here. He wants to talk to you about the war. Can he come over? Okay, I'll give him your address. Click. Next thing I know, I'm going over and meeting Hiroshi Miyamura, Medal of Honor winner, who served in World War II, actually in the Army of Occupation, because as his boat pulled into Naples, the war ended. Excuse me. He spent a year in Italy, but he was called back in Korea, and that's where he won the Medal of Honor, in Korea. But this is a guy who some of his family and a lot of people he knew were put in concentration camps right here in this country. He wasn't, because they considered him living far enough east of the coast not to be a threat. But even though that was happening to Japanese people, he joined the U.S. Army. So I love stories like that.
Wow.
That really speaks to what this book is about, which is even the people who are not being treated well, they all signed up too.
Mm-hmm.
I've got Harrison Dillard in this book.
Mm-hmm.
Harrison Dillard is a very famous Olympic champion with 4 gold medals. He's an African-American guy. He signed up. He's in the book. They put him in an all-black unit, the 92nd Infantry, and they called that regiment the Buffalo Soldiers. And they fought in Italy. As did the Japanese. They would only send the Japanese 442nd Regiment to Italy. They didn't trust them enough to send them to the South Pacific. As far as tracking down a lot of other guys, actually, once this thing got rolling and I had examples of a lot of well-known people and regular people who had been at extraordinary events during the war, that was my calling card. When I called Supreme Court Justice Stevens, I just told his spokesman, well, you know, I'd love to have the justice in my book alongside Roy Hawthorne, the Navajo code talker, and Hiroshi Miyamura, the Japanese American. And they said, absolutely, come on down to Washington. So Judge Stevens is 96. He still goes into the office every day. He's retired as a justice, but he's at the court every day.
Huh. So, Richard, I know that you had tried to interview President Bush. Tell us a little bit about that, because you recently heard from his staff.
Yes, President Bush. That's another way I got to people. I got to President Bush by, as I was leaving Justice Stevens' office in Washington, I said, Mr. Justice, by the way, do you know anybody else I should get in the book? And he looks at me and he goes, absolutely. You should have President Bush in the book because he's a real war hero. And I was like, can you call him for me? And the justice goes, he looks at me and he goes, no, that's what you're good at. So that's what I did. I called President Bush and I said, Justice Stevens said that I should get you in my book. And he went, okay, I'll be in your book. He's not in the book because he got sick on my deadline. If you recall, earlier this year, he had some health problems. That was right on my deadline, so I couldn't get him. I couldn't get him in. But I sent the book over there, and I just got an email from his spokesman, Jim McGrath, who said, he was just very nice about the book. He went, wow, this is extraordinary. You know, this is a first class product, and said something like, you have wrought such an amazing project. So that was really nice. It makes me feel good. And, you know, I still wish I'd gotten President Bush in there because, you know, no matter how you feel about him, he was a war hero. If you look up what he did, it's like crazy.
Richard, you really specialize in that black and white photography. So it was interesting that you had a picture of the individual back then and now. And, you know, the photographs are just, you get a deep sense of the person. And I said to you earlier before we went on the air that this must have been a very emotional experience for you, even photographing these individuals and having them tell their story.
Yes, it was. It was. I can remember leaving one of these interviews, and it was with Ben Ferentz, who is the last living Nuremberg war trials prosecutor. And I just sat in there talking to this man who's 98 years old while he told me how he got 22 convictions, death sentences for 22 Nazis. And I'm just sitting there going, I cannot believe I'm sitting here and I can't believe I'm talking to the guy who hung 22 Nazis. And he's just telling me like, yeah. But I got to say one thing he did make clear to me, and this is amazing. He goes, you know what? I got to know these Nazis. I got to talk to them every day, and it was for months. And I'll tell you what, these were just regular people. And had there not been this thing, this Hitler, this Nazi thing, these people would have been normal librarians, plumbers, school teachers. And in a way, you know, not that he felt bad about sending them to the gallows, but he understood it was a perversion that turns normal people into monsters. Anyway, yes, I left that house dizzy. And I've almost been dizzy since I left talking to him. I mean, I just can't. Yeah, it's amazing. So, sure, he's a famous guy, but I felt that way leaving everybody after every interview because I've just shaken my head. I cannot believe you did that. You know, after they told me, you know, I landed on Iwo Jima, the gate of the thing went down, and all the guys around me didn't even step off the boat. They were dead already, and I just ran for it. And there he is, 95 years old, talking to me. So, yeah, it was emotional.
Yes, very emotional. And, you know, one of the things, just with a couple of pictures that I looked at in the book, you know, you really have a special gift and talent for catching that face and that person in the deepest part of themselves, almost like you can look into their soul around the issue or topic that you're photographing. Do you feel that too?
Well, I can tell you the technique I use when I'm photographing these people, which is I don't pose them. Almost all the pictures were taken during our conversations. So we'd be talking, and they might pause for a moment after telling me some really, you know, heavy thing. I think that's what comes through because they are experiencing something that they just told me about when I take the picture.
Okay.
So my technique was don't pose them. Don't tell them what to do. Don't tell them to sit up straight. Don't tell them to tilt their head. Just talk to them while you're photographing them. That's my technique.
Sounds perfect. It certainly worked out perfect. And I want everyone to know that the link up on the screen is Richard's website. You can order a copy of the book from there, and Richard will send you, in fact, a signed copy of this book so that you can actually have it for yourself and to review. And actually, the intention for the book I liked that Richard put on the website was that this is a testament to diversity in the spirit of patriotism for a collective American effort, which you just described, interviewing these people from all different walks of life. So any advice for someone who wants to be a photojournalist?
Be very circumspect about wanting to be a photojournalist. There's not many jobs left, and the ones that are, unfortunately, are covering conflict around the globe. Because of the death of newspapers, there's few photojournalists doing what we did in the last, 40 years.
Yeah.
but there's plenty of jobs for war photographers, and there are jobs for people at small community newspapers. So there are outlets. But do it because you love it. That's the advice for anybody going into anything. If you love it, you'll be a success.
Well, Richard, this has been very interesting. I even feel a little emotional, hearing you talk about these men and, the last veterans of World War II. Just really touches my heart as well. So I thank you so much for joining us this morning. And for everyone out there, you can go on that website, thelastveterans.com, and request a signed copy of Richard's book. It's also available, of course, on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, but it'd be nice to get a signed copy of the book. So any last words for us, Richard, before we continue on with Sunday morning?
Well, I encourage everybody, whether you buy the book or not, to check in your local communities and see if there's any veterans, because there still are 1 million World War II veterans in this country. Most of them are anonymous, and they could be living right in your own community. And you know what? When you get to be 90-something years old, these guys love company and they love to talk. So look around. Maybe you'll meet one for yourself and be moved.
Great advice. Great advice. And that would be such an interesting conversation. And I'm sure that they would be happy that someone took the time to talk to them about that significant time in their life. Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, Richard, thank you. This is Elsie Kearns and wellnesswithelsie.com. And I'm going to put this link up on Facebook again, that link, so that you can go right to Richard's website and get more details about this book. Thanks a lot, Richard, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Elsie.
Okay.